In the early 1980s, Australian media mogul Rupert Murdoch bought one of Boston's two big dailies, the Herald, and he made some changes.
People say, "Oh, God, Murdoch." I said, that was fun.
Frank Phillips was a reporter there.
That was real fun journalism. These guys with Australian accents. I'd say, we got a budget story here. The governor, I can get a piece of it before it comes out. We get a scoop. And they say, Frank, fuck the budgets. Says, we want you to stir up the animals. We don't need budget stories.
That was the Murdoch mandate.
Go out and stir up the animals. And I said, okay.
Phillips was a politics reporter. He wasn't going to file splashy stories about mob hits or the latest meltdown of the Boston Red Sox. But he had faith that in this town, the world of politics could be just as stirring. He told me that every morning he'd drive in from the suburbs, and just as he crested the hill in Belmont and beheld the city below, Phillips thought about the scene in Roger Rabbit when the investigator character first enters Toontown. A red curtain lifts, and suddenly the world comes to life in absurd, cartoonish color. Boston was Toontown. The politicians were the Toons, and Phillips was here to tell their stories. The more scandalous, the better.
There are people cutting corners, people doing favors, patronage jobs. And I would go in there to this press room when all these young Ivy Leaguers would be on a globe here, and, oh, God, these people, can you imagine what they're doing? I said, what are you complaining about? They're characters, and we want them to screw around. I said, guys, catch them.
As it turned out, 1986 would be a memorable year in Toontown, a great year for catching mischief and stirring up the animals.
Oh yeah, this is great. This is when politics was politics in Massachusetts.
It was an off year for president, but an on year for all the big statewide offices: governor, attorney general, secretary of state, and of course, treasurer. Bob Crane, master of the lottery, had already been elected to an unprecedented 5 terms, thanks to the legislature lifting term limits on his job, and he was now running for a 6th. At the beginning of that year, there was no reason to believe Crane's race would be the race to watch, but then there was no reason to believe what was about to happen in the governor's race.
Let me go back to 86.
Early in the election season, Philip got a tip that the Republican nominee for governor suffered from occasional mental breakdowns. He had been spotted talking to himself on the phone and wandering around his office, stark naked, first thing in the morning.
And I remember talking to even my editors with their Aussie accents. They said, oh, Jesus Christ, how do we write that?
The situation. I've never seen anything like this. 2,000 signatures.
Then it came out that the nomination papers for this same candidate included forged signatures.
Forgeries. All told, local officials have corroborated 649 such alleged forgeries.
Once that story broke, the Republican Party hastily drafted a new candidate. But pretty soon it came out that this second candidate had claimed to be a Vietnam veteran when in fact he never served.
He made the startling announcement that he's been lying about his military service for years.
And he finally withdrew. So they were absolutely in turmoil.
The continuing confusion at the top of the ticket has made the GOP a laughingstock. Even worse, it's virtually...
Finally, the party drafted a third candidate. But even then, the original candidate, the one with the forged signatures, was still listed on the ballot and refusing to remove himself because he was mad at his own party for dumping him.
Here, they kicked him to the curb. He was a mess.
And the turmoil went on and on and on.
Search committee as the party's latest, and Republicans hope last, candidate for governor.
Once the drama on the Republican side finally did settle down, there was no more story. The general election would be a blowout for the incumbent Democrat, Michael Dukakis, which meant that attention that year shifted down ballot to the treasurer's race.
There was no other race, no other statewide race.
Which was actually shaping up to be quite interesting. From GBH News, this is Scratch and Win, the making of America's most successful lottery. I'm Ian Coss. All through the lottery's formative years, there was one man making the key leadership appointments, one man making sure the revenue kept going up, Treasurer Bob Crane. As you may recall, Crane was handed the keys to the lottery partly to ensure that the patronage jobs would go to Democrats, which they did. The whole machine was well-oiled to deliver money and jobs year after year when the 1986 election arrived, and suddenly, Crane found himself in the fight of his life. This is Part 7, The Dirtiest Race in the Commonwealth. Support for Scratch and Win comes from Safety Insurance, offering auto insurance policies designed to help for when the worst happens. You can ask an independent agent about safety insurance. Safety Insurance will help you manage life's storms. You told me that if this story were a movie, it should open with a shot of the St. Patrick's Day breakfast in South Boston. Could you tell me why?
That was the gathering of the clan of old Irish Catholic power players in Massachusetts.
Christy George was for many years the State House reporter for WGBH. And when I told her I was doing something on Bob Crane, she immediately mentioned this breakfast, which she covered many times.
It's an old hall, brown walls and trestle tables. And as a reporter, I never ate, but it was the Irish breakfast with the eggs and the blood sausage and potatoes.
If you're Irish, come in the parlor. There's a welcome there for you.
And every year, they would gather in South Boston and listen to jokes and songs and barbs and celebrate their kinship and their grudges and their power.
If you're Irish, this is the place for you. Hey, thank you.
The main event for these breakfasts was and is the roasting, a chance to skewer friends and enemies alike. And Bob Crane was always there for it.
Now you can tell all your Yankee friends you're in show business and it's not a bad racket.
Like any good meme, the jokes at these events are dense, layered with insider references. I don't understand most of them. But the running joke about Bob Crane was pretty simple.
Bob Crane.
He was a rogue.
About 6 months ago when the heat was really on, I'm not sure what investigation that was. Was it the condos? No. Was it the place down on the street? Well, one of those, scams that he gets involved in,
It's not that Crane was necessarily rotten or crooked, not deep in some gangster's pocket, but that he was always right on the edge of what was considered fair play in the game of politics.
Race, and I was very happy to get 61% of the vote. I understand that's almost as much as your commission on the retirement fund.
Okay, that joke is a little in the weeds. This one's more clear.
My advice to you, Mr. Treasurer, would be next time use a shredder.
There were many accusations that swirled around Crane. His handling of state money, his relationships with banks, his wily election tactics. But the one that never ever went away, that was so constant it barely felt newsworthy at all, was patronage. So how did hiring work at the lottery? Did you really need to know somebody to get a job there?
I think mostly.
David O'Reilly, who you may remember from episode 3, started out as a part-timer, picking up paper betting slips in a state-owned gremlin. But he stayed at the lottery for over 40 years.
Yeah. We used to say, who is your godfather? And it usually was godfather rather than godmother. And it was a senator or a rep, who would then get in touch with Crane and say, hey, I got this person. I'd really like to help.
Godfather was the casual term for it. The more formal term was sponsor.
Who's your sponsor?
So tell me, how did you start working for the Massachusetts State Lottery?
I actually answered an ad in a Wednesday paper, I remember, and I was just out of the service.
Andy Solari, the communications technician we heard in episode 6, claims that he was one of those rare unsponsored hires, but he had the benefit of very specialized skills and also serving in the military.
Somebody told me you never see ads for a lottery job in the paper because it's really political and stuff. But I went in and interviewed, and one of the first questions you get when you start at the lottery is, who's your sponsor? You know?
Oh, really?
And I didn't even know what that meant, but everyone had a sponsor there.
So when you met other employees at the lottery, could you sort of tell, oh, this person is from, the Senate president's office, and this person is from, the state rep from Canton, or would you kind of know?
Well, if they had a good sponsor, they'd let you know. Okay, don't mess with me,
Patronage is probably as old as politics, certainly in this country. It's right there in the Constitution that the president gets to appoint people, presumably their people. That's the origin of the phrase, "to the victor belong the spoils." It was spoken by a Democratic senator from New York in 1832 as a defense of patronage, as in, get over it. We won, now we get to hire whoever we want. Over the years, Crane provided jobs to the son of House Speaker Tom McGee. That's the former tank commander from episode 5 who dropped lots of F-bombs. And to multiple aides of Bill Bolger, Lord of the State Senate, as well as not one, but 3 children of Attorney General Frank Bellotti.
There was Bellottis, there were Kings, there were Vopis, there, names you'd recognize from politicians and stuff.
A Republican state senator once claimed to have studied the political makeup of the lottery and found that 98% of employees were registered Democrats. 98%. Treasurer Crane certainly made good use of his political spoils. By the mid-1980s, the Massachusetts Lottery employed over 400 people. It was famous for doing everything in-house, from ticket design to IT, which allowed it to hire way more people than other states. Crane himself estimated that half of those people had a sponsor. And to Crane, it was not anything to be secretive about.
And there is nothing wrong with patronage. Patronage, in my opinion, is giving a job to someone who has been sent to you for an interview by a person in government as a sponsor. If that person is qualified and can do the job, then I'm for hiring him or her.
He was unapologetic.
Renee Loth is a longtime opinion columnist for the Boston Globe, and she did an extended interview with Crane towards the end of his career.
Completely sanguine about his reputation, about the patronage that he presided over at the lottery, or favors he did for friends and political allies that, today would make your hair curl.
And Crane had a pretty simple argument to back it up. Just look at the lottery's results.
And I've been successful by hiring people that probably came to me from a legislator, hiring people I probably went to college with, hiring people that I knew from another walk of life. But they all were qualified and did their job and made me look good.
Lottery sales were up, payouts to players were up, and not one major scandal in all its years of operation.
I got to say that even for all the politics, it was run like a business.
Again, Andy Solari.
That's a big cash cow, obviously. It was something you didn't want to screw it up. And I don't want to disparage anybody here, but there were guys that were there just because they knew somebody. But most of the time, people knew their job and did their job and took it very seriously.
David O'Reilly, who got his first job through a family connection, argues that in many cases, people took those patronage jobs even more seriously.
I don't know, there's something that comes with that too. Like, you really are there, representing that person who gave you the job. So it comes with more responsibility, really, that you don't want to screw it up.
There was a sense of shared purpose. For an employee to rig a drawing or misprint a ticket or botch a product rollout, they weren't just failing themselves. They would be betraying the lottery family.
the Crane days, we were honestly a family. It is not like that anymore. It's just totally not like that because we've gone through, I think, 5 or 6 treasurers since Crane. But when you think of the early days, it was only Crane. So it was his family of employees.
And like any family, it came with expectations. For one thing, you had to step up around election time.
When I first started, I was given nomination papers, and I said, what are these?
The nomination papers were for Crane's re-election campaign.
I wasn't very political. I wasn't very aware of the politics behind the lottery. So I said, what am I supposed to do with this? And this guy told me, you go door to door and you get signatures for Bob Crane. He's the boss.
They didn't ask. They said, hey, you're going to collect the signatures for Bob Crane.
Andy Solari got the same request.
I had bought this house in Brockton that needed a lot of work, and I had the floors ripped out. I'm standing in the basement. I'm surrounded in dirt. The guy comes to the door and he goes, hey, you got those signatures yet? And I go, I'm tied up with all this stuff. And he goes, well, I need them.
And it was not a request.
I didn't take it that way. It was do you want to work overtime this week? So it was always implied, I guess, but heavily implied.
Here, the power of patronage comes full circle. Crane doles out the jobs in order to gain political support. And then, of course, all those people know their jobs depend on him being in power, so they work to keep him there. It's classic machine politics, the kind of thing you associate with New York ward bosses in the 1890s, but alive and well in the Massachusetts lottery of the 1980s. What do you think changed fundamentally? It's like, why did that fall out of favor?
I just think that Watergate and all of the fallout from that seeped into politics, even at the local level, even at the street level.
As Renee Loth recalls, it was really after Watergate that patronage started to become a dirty word.
The feeling that we needed to clean up government, that there was too much corruption, and that we just needed to clean house.
We'll hear next in number 1520, Elrod against Byrne.
In the mid-1970s, soon after Watergate, the Supreme Court heard the first in a series of cases challenging the practice of patronage. This one about a local sheriff's office in Illinois.
So-called patronage practice.
That case was followed a few years later by another brought by public defenders in Rockland County, New York.
I believe there are 2 central questions before this court. First, whether it is in the best interest of this country to virtually end the patronage system.
Both cases resulted in rulings that limited patronage.
We'll resume there at 1 o'clock.
But those rulings were just part of a larger political movement of reform that sought to root out cronyism and inside dealing, that embraced transparency.
Jimmy Carter represented part of that. Mike Dukakis represented part of that. A new generation was coming in with more idealism and less pragmatism, maybe. But it took a long time for the old ways to die out.
In Massachusetts, Robert Crane was one of those last practitioners of the old ways. He had become treasurer back in 1964, with some help, by the way, from the previous treasurer, who also happened to be the best man at Crane's wedding. That's how it worked then. But in the era of squeaky clean Michael Dukakis, Crane was looking more and more out of step. He was ripe for a challenger. And in 1986, he got one.
Massachusetts has the most powerful democratic machine in the country. And if I win, I'm going to root out the corruption and cronyism that exists in the state treasurer's office.
The challenger was named Joyce Hampers, a former state revenue commissioner and a Republican. But she barely ever mentioned her party affiliation or pedigree. Hampers ran on a message of cleaning up government, including at the lottery.
Hampers says she would make some changes. Bigger payoffs for megabucks runner-ups, for one, and an end to patronage hiring.
The people who can really measure up, stay. The people who can't, go.
Patronage, this thing that had been business as usual at the lottery since the beginning, was now up for debate.
About half the lottery employees were sponsored, so to speak.
This is a $1.6 billion business. You don't run it with hacks.
And it looks like the Hampers campaign succeeded in making patronage an issue, because in 1986, you suddenly see Globe reports about lottery hiring, with stats and tables comparing our lottery to other states.
The charge, the treasurer's staff is 5 times larger than the national average.
This is a time when...
Not surprisingly, the reporting showed that Crane's family of employees was overwhelmingly white, even more so than other parts of state government. In 1986, only 5.5% of lottery employees identified as members of a minority group. And the family was likely larger than it needed to be, too. At that time, the Massachusetts lottery had more employees than the New York and Pennsylvania lotteries put together. And those are both much bigger states.
I'm sorry my campaign had to use negative advertising. It's not the campaign I wanted to run, but I know of no other way the voters could have known about the hiring practices, the big money from Mercury Enterprises.
Crane was not expecting a serious challenge that year. No Republican had been elected treasurer since the 1940s, and Crane hadn't even had to debate an opponent since the 1970s. He had not seriously fundraised or staffed up. But the challenge from Hampers came on fast and hard. She and her husband owned a healthcare business with a lucrative patent on a dialysis machine. By the summer of '86, she had spent $200,000 of her own money on TV and radio ads. By the end of the campaign, she would spend $1.5 million. Joyce Hampers did not respond to our request for an interview.
She had money to put into it, and that's what caught our eye.
Frank Phillips, reporter for the Boston Herald, started to tune in. This could be a story.
And the Republican operatives were chewing on our ear and say, hey, listen, this is going to be a real race. Crane's vulnerable. You could get him, and he could lose this.
When you're attacking the integrity of a politician, you don't need proof. You just need enough shady-sounding stuff that the public can draw their own conclusions. And Bob Crane supplied plenty of good material, including a decades-old business relationship with a man named Eugene Merkett.
So Gene Merkett owned a company called Food Enterprises. I think it was based in Canton, Mass.
This is ad executive Jack Connors.
And he was a food broker.
A food broker is the person who gets products onto grocery store shelves, and not just on the shelf, but on the best spot, on the best shelf.
And I happen to be a victim of Gene Merkett because when I got out of college and out of the Army, I was a Campbell soup salesman in the frozen food division, Swanson TV dinners, which I don't recommend, Pepperidge Farm turnovers, which are pretty good. And I'd go into a supermarket, and now if you walk into a supermarket, you walk down these rows of glass freezer cases. But back then, they were like refrigerator cases with frost.
Back then, the world of food brokering was also pretty ruthless.
And you're moving their dinners out to move your dinners in. You came back the next week. Your dinners were gone. Their dinners were back.
The disappearing dinners, as far as Connors is concerned, that was Merkett's doing. At one point, Merkett Enterprises was the biggest food broker in the entire country.
They were the best of the food brokers, and probably the toughest. And I don't know the details, but Gene Merkett hired Bob Crane.
While Crane was working as treasurer, collecting his treasurer's salary, he was also working as a consultant for Merkett Enterprises. In some years, he made a lot more money from Merkett than he did from the state. That plus the use of a company Cadillac.
Bob Crane became an asset, and it was part of the selling picture, if you will.
The brokerage business, after all, like politics, is all about relationships. That's how you get your clients' frozen dinners at the front of the supermarket case. And according to Connors, Crane was helpful in cultivating those relationships. Part of the entertainment package, if you will.
So when Gene Murcutt had Birdseye coming in or whatever, wouldn't have surprised me if Bob Crane was there to sing 2 or 3 songs at the end of dinner. And it just made people's hearts a little happier.
One of the charming and confounding things about Bob Crane is that he had this what you see is what you get quality to his politics. It was not a secret that he had a lucrative side gig, any more than it was a secret that the lottery was loaded up with patronage jobs. These were not things to be ashamed of. Crane worked for Murcutt. Murcutt supported Crane's campaigns. Crane deposited state funds in a bank that Murcutt helped run. This was simply how the game was played.
It never occurred to me that that was anything but smart business. Didn't bother me.
The Murcutt story had made headlines back in the 1970s. Crane was even investigated by a federal grand jury at one point, but they never brought charges. And it seemed like the issue was settled until the summer of 1986, when Joyce Hampers launched her media blitz.
Bob Crane's been giving us the same old song and dance for 22 years. Now people wonder just who's been pulling the strings. He gets $130,000 a year on the side while he's supposed to be serving.
Hampers' bet was that if the public knew about Crane's dealings, they would turn on him, even after electing him 5 times before.
Joyce Hampers put her money on a high-risk strategy, gambling that she could win by exposing things like Bob Crane's outside income.
All through the summer of '86, Crane did not really engage. His campaign hadn't formally kicked off, and he wasn't even planning to run TV ads at all. No debates were scheduled.
That's right. Last year alone, Bob Crane made over $130,000 on the side. No wonder he's smiling.
Meanwhile, the media campaign against him reached its peak on September 17th. That night at 6:55 p.m., primetime, viewers of all 3 major Boston TV stations were greeted with a 5-minute attack ad, more like an infomercial, really, outlining a litany of accusations against Crane and claiming that, quote, Bob Crane has been playing us all for fools. Afterwards, a Boston Herald poll showed the race in a dead heat. Both candidates had exactly 37% of the vote. The rest were undecided. Clearly, Crane could not ignore Hampers any longer.
The following special edition of Point of View is being jointly sponsored by WLVI TV 56.
The day after those poll results were reported, Crane and Hampers met for their first debate.
The Treasurer of Massachusetts is also the Receiver General and is responsible.
Crane's white hair is combed neatly to one side. Hampers is wearing a big pearl necklace and even bigger pearl earrings. I'd say they're both going for respectable.
Both here. And let me, if I might, start with you, Mr. Crane. If you are reelected, you will have been given the opportunity to serve as Treasurer for 26 years. Why is it good for the people of Massachusetts to have the same Treasurer for so long?
Well, it's good for the people of Massachusetts.
From the beginning, Crane is put on the defensive, forced to explain his record, his hiring practices, his long tenure, something he had not really had to do in a long time.
Accomplishments, but just let me tell you this, Judy. Kyle Yastrzemski played in the Red Sox outfield for 23 years, and I didn't hear anyone complain about it. Senator Kennedy...
And he mostly sticks with a pretty simple line of defense. So what? Who cares?
Mrs. Hampers.
Hampers, on the other hand, took the opportunity to press her attack and keep the focus where she wanted it, on Crane.
Tonight, what we're talking about, and we're talking about ethics, we're talking about integrity, we're talking about the old gang, we're talking about cronyism, we're talking about 22 years of
The debate setting, I should say, is very intimate. They're sitting in chairs, side by side, around a low table, almost uncomfortably close.
matter of timing.
Well,
So
you're
I think
accusing
you
him
really-
of doing things that are illegal.
I am accusing him of doing things that are unethical
You're
or
being
whatever.
very reckless with your accusations, Mrs.
well,
Hampers.
may I
In
finish?
particular, you are distorting the
May I
truth.
finish?
You are distorting my record. It doesn't interfere in one single way with the job I do as state treasurer. And I said,
But what you do see in that debate is an opening for a counterattack. Crane doesn't quite seize on it himself, but it's pretty clear that the thing Hampers does not want to talk about so much is her own record.
That's all we have time for. I'd love it if you would both come back for another half hour at the end of the election.
To go through all these things.
I'm here. I'm here if you want to come back, and if not, I thank you both very much. I really appreciate you coming in.
At what point did you get involved?
In late September, I was asked by him and by a couple of people very close to him to get involved in his campaign.
Around the time of that debate, Crane reached out for help from one of his younger allies, William Galvin, the man who occupied Crane's old seat in the state legislature.
To take on Hampers more aggressively than he was capable of. It wasn't his personality to go after anybody. I was a little more aggressive, and I was significantly younger.
Crane's magic power was always charm. He was likable, gentlemanly. But this election was shaping up to be an all-out brawl, and Crane needed someone who could hit back. So you were kind of the attack dog.
I wouldn't agree with that term, but I certainly could reply to false statements and did.
Galvin became the new campaign manager. And in retrospect, we can see that he was just the man for the job. An opponent later dubbed Galvin the Prince of Darkness, a nod to his skills in the darker arts of politics. Amazingly, that name has stuck. Galvin is currently our Secretary of State, a job he has held for 30 years, and you can still find news articles that casually and unironically refer to him as the Prince of Darkness.
One of the things that emerged as a significant issue is in doing research on her record as revenue commissioner.
Hampers had served as the revenue commissioner for the state in the early 1980s, so there was plenty of potential history to work with. One of her tax collectors had pleaded guilty to taking a bribe, and at one point, Hampers herself had to pay tens of thousands of dollars in back taxes to the IRS. Pretty ironic for a revenue commissioner.
So maybe we should take a look at the dirty laundry behind her campaign. Corruption in the Revenue Department during Hampers.
So Galvin and the Democrats began their counterattack. But at first, nothing seemed to gain traction. Some polling even showed that attacks on Hampers were only making her more popular and more sympathetic. It was, in the words of the Globe, the Democratic establishment ganging up on a lone woman. But then they found the signature. It first appears on October 2nd. Well, it didn't start with a signature. It started with a fired lawyer at the Revenue Department. Yeah, so on October 2nd, you file this piece that is, it's kind of complicated. There's this link between Joyce Hampers, the candidate, and this fired lawyer from the Revenue Department.
Ex-Revenue Commissioner Joyce Hampers set up a law practice. Is this when?
In this piece, reporter Frank Phillips revealed a suspicious connection. A lawyer in the department got fired and then got a very generous settlement of $29,000 from Commissioner Hampers. Then sometime later, the two wound up working together.
Who later collected a settlement that Hampers approved.
The story appeared on the bottom of page 4. It's not especially exciting stuff, certainly not stirring up the animals. But it got interesting when Hampers denied she had ever signed off on that settlement.
From the first story, it was complicated. This boiled it down. Did she sign the letter or not?
It got even more interesting when the Crane campaign then got its hands on the original settlement document with Hampers' signature. And Hampers continued to insist she did not sign it.
She denied that it was her signature on these documents, which we had.
Again, William Galvin, Crane's campaign manager.
And she denied it, and she denied it, and she denied it. And I confronted her and confronted her and confronted.
And when she said she didn't sign the letter, my ears picked up, and I said, we got to find a handwriting expert.
The next day, Phillips landed a story on page 1. It included a very serious-looking image of the handwriting expert holding a document in one hand and a magnifying glass in the other.
Handwriting analyst yesterday shot down State Treasurer hopeful Joyce Hampers' claim that she didn't sign a controversial 1980 letter requesting a settlement.
Within a week, the Crane campaign was running attack ads about what came to be known as Signature Gate, and it was Hampers who was on the defensive. She soon reversed her stance and admitted that it was her signature.
You know, I don't have 20 advisors and an old gang behind me. I'm just a woman running for office, and so in the heat of the campaign, yes, in retrospect, I should have taken the time to sit down, go over the file.
It was one of those things in a campaign, and I've seen it so many times before. Little things get blown up into major debates.
You think in retrospect that it was a mistake not to have admitted that you, in the first place, that you'd signed the letter?
Well, Joe, the letter, as I said...
We always know Bob had stuff going on. She was trying to make herself squeaky clean. But if you're going to be squeaky clean, you got to be squeaky clean.
Her credibility was damaged, and, off we went.
Bob Crane and the success of the lottery has helped my business and others like it for 15 years.
Alongside those attacks, Crane also had a positive message to run on. I'm the guy who gave you the lottery.
Crane is deliberately running on the lottery as one of his major accomplishments, and the strategy is so effective that some voters worry that if he loses the election, the lottery will go too.
And Crane could always count on his lottery for a little October boost. That month, the state lottery distributed 200,000 copies of a newsletter with not one but two images of Crane on the cover. Then later the same month, the lottery mailed out coupons for free tickets to 1.8 million households with Crane's name right there on the coupon. The Globe even reported that the lottery's own PR firm was paying a private investigator to help do opposition research on Hampers. It was a full mobilization of the lottery machine to save the man who held that machine together.
Good evening, I'm Joe Day. Tonight, the candidates for Massachusetts State Treasurer debate.
On October 20th, with about 2 weeks to go until Election Day, the candidates met for a second debate, and there were no niceties.
How can the public have any confidence in you as treasurer when you can't even recall signing a letter?
The race had clearly devolved into something ugly and pretty unusual for the low-profile job of state treasurer. The Harvard Crimson called it the dirtiest race in the Commonwealth. You had two candidates, both with some questionable history, both on the attack, and both trying to claim the moral high ground. Hampers was running out of time to change the narrative, to make the race about Crane and his shadowy outside income from the food broker. So that night, she made a final gamble, a new accusation.
Tonight, I'm going to give Mr. Crane a chance to answer me once and for all. I allege that Mr. Crane, in applying for a mortgage for a luxury condominium almost 2 years ago, listed income far above the $130,000 he has admitted to publicly. Mr. Crane, I ask you tonight to produce those mortgage documents and disprove the allegation. If you do, and it shows nothing more than the $130,000, I will withdraw from this race.
No one knew where the information behind this accusation was coming from, but Hampers was ready to bet her campaign on it.
I will spend not another dime, and I will campaign not a minute longer. Let's see the facts, Mr. Crane. Let's throw away the ads, and let's set the record straight.
Crane was clearly not prepared to respond and simply moved on to his closing argument.
So tonight I would just like to say this,
allowing the challenge to hang there in the blue-walled TV studio.
Thank you both for being with me tonight. Thank you in our audience for watching. I'm Joe Day. Good evening. Be sure to vote.
Last night, Hampers charged that Crane made over $250,000 in 1984.
But Crane could not ignore the challenge for long. The very next day, he held a press conference.
I've been in the food business on and off for 30 years.
This afternoon, Crane took what he called the unprecedented step of releasing his returns to the public.
He released the documents Hampers was asking for, showing all his income. And Hampers would not be dropping out of the race, because just as she claimed, Crane did, in fact, make over $200,000 in outside income during some of his years as treasurer.
No one ever asked me how much money I made in 1984.
He did have an explanation for all that income and how he'd handled it. Still, though, the whole press conference looked bad, how he'd been forced into it. At one point, a reporter asked bluntly, "Are you a millionaire, Bob?"
Are you a millionaire, Bob?
It would appear that I have a net worth of over $1 million.
The response sounded like a confession. This press conference had all the makings of a signature gate moment, where the nitty-gritty complexity of government is all swept away, and voters can assess their candidate in stark terms of honesty, integrity. Have they been straight with me? Suddenly, the campaign was back on the terrain that Hampers had wanted to fight on all along. That's what you'd think, at least. But William Galvin, Crane's campaign manager, has a theory to explain what actually happened.
We're going to the bottom of the third inning at Shea Stadium in New York. The Red Sox 3, the Mets nothing.
The Red Sox were in the World Series that week, playing the Mets in what would be a nail-biter of a series. The day of that awkward press conference, the Sox lost Game 3. The next day, they lost Game 4. But the day after that, they came back to win Game 5.
Mets, and this is the epitome, the pinnacle of all baseball.
The thing about politics as entertainment, politics as sport, politics as stirring up the animals in all of us, is that when there is better entertainment to be had, there's not much reason to pay attention to a race for state treasurer. The candidates actually met for one more debate that year, Hampers' final chance to make her case.
And the debate was a Sunday afternoon. It was at Channel 4, and it happened to fall on the same day there was a Red Sox game.
Fastball hit into left center field. Base hit.
That would be Game 6 of the World Series.
The game was up against the debate.
The Red Sox lost that one in perhaps the most mortifying 3 seconds of Boston sports history, when a simple ground ball rolled between the legs of our first baseman, giving the Mets the win. But if the Red Sox were cursed that year, Bob Crane was charmed.
And he later said, yeah, no, I was very lucky.
In the end, it wasn't close. Crane won handily. Do you feel like the public cared about the allegations against Crane in that campaign? You know, about the patronage, about the, you know, whatever his dealings. Like, did people care?
Do you remember the Ayatollah and the what do they call the head of the Iran? The Shah.
Frank Phillips remembers a political cartoon that came out during that campaign, showing the candidates as the two leaders of Iran before and after the revolution. You had the corrupt and party-loving Shah, and then you had the corrupt and party-stifling Ayatollah. You can guess who was who.
Crane has got a champagne bottle and laughing, and the Ayatollah is looking severe and said, "You want the Ayatollah or the Shah?" The Shah having a good time. And it really summed up the campaign. And she came across as the Ayatollah, scolding. And it's perhaps a good deal sexist, but she was scolding a guy that everybody liked, you know.
The night of the election, Hampers claimed a kind of moral victory. She said in her concession speech, quote, "Now questions are being asked and new standards being applied, and an era of good old boys is being brought to a close." And she was right about that.
Yes. Am I allowed to sing a song to the treasurer? This man's been very, very good to me and to a lot of people.
In one of Crane's final St. Patrick's Day breakfasts as treasurer, he got a series of roasts and tributes, including from some of the younger politicians coming up on the scene.
You made me. No, you got the wrong key, Paul.
Well, one of you has.
And I gotta say, that new generation, that more reform-minded generation, they're not the entertainers that Crane and his cohort were. The old guard really did know how to put on a good show.
I don't have a brother. I got you there. Thank you, Mr. Treasurer. Happy St. Patrick's Day to all of you.
I try not to be too nostalgic about the days of patronage and machine politics. It was flawed and exclusionary. But I do think it's worth looking closely at what was lost when relationships and party loyalty were swapped out for far more elusive qualities like ideology and merit. Justice Antonin Scalia, in one of those landmark patronage cases before the Supreme Court, delivered what I find to be a kind of intriguing dissent, a defense of patronage. Scalia argues that as the political machines faded from New York and Chicago and Boston, one result is that parties lost their discipline and politicians became more focused on special interest groups than they were on their own constituents. He may be overstating the causality, but there is something prescient in what Scalia is arguing, especially in our moment, when our politics are so polarized and our parties are so weak, that maybe patronage was the glue of party politics all along, the thing that bound constituents to elected officials in a way that was material. It was, in a strange way, the ultimate form of accountability. You deliver for me, I deliver for you. It's worth noting that when you look at all the issues at play in the 1986 election, the lottery itself was not really one of them, not in a fundamental way. You don't hear them debating the amount of lottery advertising or whether the drawing should be televised. Once, the very idea of a lottery was a bitter partisan issue, a moral issue. By 1986, it was a given. For the old gang and for the reformers, for the Democrats and the Republicans. They had all accepted it as part of politics, part of life. It was just a question of who could run it better. But Crane and the lottery story is not over quite yet. In our final episode, the vaudeville treasurer gets one last term to cement his legacy as creator of the most successful lottery in America. And the game that does it, the one that really seals the deal, well, it had been right in his hands the whole time.
With the new instant game Wildcard, you can win up to $5,000.
Just waiting for the moment to make its comeback.
So anyone who can scratch can win.
That's next time.
You made me love you. I didn't want to do it. I didn't want to do it. You made me want you. And all the time you knew it. I guess you always knew it. You made me happy sometimes. You made me sad. But there were times, dear, you made me feel so bad.
The series is produced by Isabel Hibbard and myself, Ian Coss. It's edited by Lacey Roberts. The editorial supervisor is Jennifer McKim, with support from Ryan Alderman. May Lay is the project manager, and the executive producer is Devin Maverick Robbins. Special thanks this episode to Christy George, former reporter for WGBH, not only for helping me understand this madcap era in state politics, but also for helping me find some of those news reports she filed about it. Thanks also to the Boston Public Library, who helped me find all those Herald articles that Frank Phillips wrote. Get this, he had 15 articles just on that one race, just in the month of October, 1986. As always, we are indebted to Peter Higgins and the GBH Archives for providing so much of the material you hear in this show. Truly, that archival sound brings this show to life. Finally, thanks to political scientist Eitan Hirsch, who pointed me towards that opinion Justice Scalia wrote. The audiogram for this episode was edited by Julia McCarthy. The Scratch and Win video series is produced by Marta Franco and Joni Tobin. The artwork is by Bill Miller and Mami Hawabawo. Our closing song is You Made Me Love You, performed by Massachusetts State Treasurer Bob Crane. Scratch and Win is a production of GBH News and distributed by PRX.
So give me what I cry for. You know you got the brand of kisses that I die for. You know you made me. You know you made me. You know you made me love you. And all the time you knew it. Thank you.